All right. Hey there. My name's Cameron. This is probably going to be the first video on my channel. I wanted to explore some concepts of things that I've been learning the last couple of years about uh, energy, ecology, where humanity is headed, what the future looks like. And I created some charts and graphs because I'm a nerd and I'm a designer. And that's how I like to think about these things. And I tend to share these types of ideas with my friends. Usually I want a napkin or a piece of paper to show this. So these are kind of clean versions of that. The first two things I want to share are two big concepts that I think are probably some of the most important things to understand if you're trying to get a gauge of where we're headed as a culture, of what the main issues will be, and what is really important to understand if you want to understand what the future is going to be like. I'm a millennial. There's all sorts of expectations in my mind growing up in the 90s and 2000s of what the world would look like, of what, growth of society, growth of, my own aspirations and things would be like. But I think it's safe to say, getting into the 2010s and now the 2020s, life looks pretty different and things don't look necessarily how we were shown to expect. And so I've been curious about that and why it is what it is and where things are headed. And hopefully these graphs, spark some curiosity for you. Maybe you get some ideas. Hopefully it's not too depressing. I think for me, I'm generally an optimist, but, I'm pragmatic and I want to understand where things are going. I'd rather, have an idea of where things are heading and prepare to adapt, than be shocked by them. I grew up playing bands and loading trucks with band gear all the time, and there's always this concept in my mind of like, put things where they're going to fall, understand the worst case scenario and prepare for that. So, in that way it was putting the small things on top and the large things on bottom and making sure, a guitar was in the bottom where it wasn't going to slip out somewhere. So, that's kind of an anecdotal weird thing, but anyway, that goes along with this. I want to share the things I'm learning, with my friends and have people understand and not be surprised about likely where a lot of things are headed. So this first concept is from, I guess I would call him a writer, a speaker, an ecologist, economist, all of these types of things. His name's Nate Hagans. He has a great podcast called The Great Simplification. He's definitely like a wide boundary thinker who likes to tie a lot of ideas together. And I feel like I've learned a lot from him over the last couple of years of watching his podcast and learning. But I think when I first heard this concept, it was one of those things where you hear it and the moment they explain it, you're like, well, of course, this is exactly what's going on. It rung really true. It made a lot of sense. And I was pretty frustrated that I, didn't have this top of mind right now, that I'm not thinking about it as in my normal everyday life, because I think it's going to have great effect. And so anyway, I'm going on about that. But his first concept that really resonated with me was called the carbon pulse. So I'm going to show you a chart here. This is just a basic rendition of the idea. But the way he presented it in one of his videos was, if you get a chart and you zoom out on a particular time scale, maybe a few thousand years, I picked 6,000 here. And this is all conceptual. This isn't like perfectly accurate. I just want you to get the concept. If you zoom out far enough, our usage of fossilized energy in the form of, oil, gas, coal, these things will probably look something like this peak. And so obviously, as we discover coal, as we discover oil and gas, our usage of carbon-based fossil energy skyrockets. I got the year 2000 in the middle here. And this is like, humanity's built on this. Modern humanity is built on this. Our entire technological society, industrial revolution is built on this. We went from coal to oil. It's all built on that. Even today, everything is built. Even the regenerative, or not regenerative, but what am I trying to say? Solar panels, all of the wind turbines, everything is built off of the surplus of fossilized energy. And so I could spend a whole episode just on what he talks about the miracle of oil and the miracle of the amount of work units that we get out of that and how it's created everything. But for now, just know that all of society, all of modern culture is built on this surplus of energy. And the catch, of course, is that it's finite. And eventually it's going to wear out, or we're going to run out. And we don't quite know where the peak is. And it's not that we're going to, Earth is not going to have one drop of oil left. But the problem is once we've exhausted all the easy to find sources, then those sources get more and more expensive and harder to reach. And so somewhere, probably in this century, some people think it's already happened in 2018, this peak is something that we've hit. Sometimes they call it peak oil. And that's the idea that, it's the cheapest and easiest to extract that oil will ever be. And after that, it's going to only get more expensive and harder to get, which would create some sort of downslope like this. Now, with renewables, maybe we can change this slope, but no matter what, how you zoom out on this time scale, we'll have an up and then we'll have a down. And humanity will have to adapt and deal with that somehow. And so could be on the order of decades, could be, the order of centuries, really depends on how we adapt. So it's not like a perfectly clear picture, but as a concept, it stands, So that has had a big effect on my mind of how I'm thinking about the future. I have kids and I'm trying to understand what kind of world they're going to grow into, what kind of world we're going to be a part of. And I think the carbon pulse is something that everybody should have an idea of. For some people, it might be really anxiety inducing. And so maybe there's a way to subtly get into this and just understand that things are finite. But I think having an understanding of this at a basic level will help you better anticipate where the future is going and what kinds of things we're going to deal with. So let's see. Related to carbon pulse, the other chart I want to share is a basic rendition of something called overshoot, which I also learned from Nate's podcast. He had William Reese on, who is a professor up in the Vancouver area, I believe. And he talks about this concept called overshoot a lot. And I think it's perfectly tied with carbon pulse and very obvious also. And a little bit shocking and sad that we've grown up into a world, or at least I've grown up into a world that doesn't take this into account. Our default is exponential growth forever for shareholders, for stock value. Everybody's going to do better than their parents and have a better financial situation, and we will grow forever to the stars and on every planet. That's obviously doesn't stand and does not carry out. And so I'll show you kind of the concept here of overshoot. On the left side here, we have human use of Earth. So that includes, all the natural resources, everything from, fish stocks to forests to natural resources we're pulling out of the ground, to also saturation of pollution. How quickly can an ecosystem recover from pollutants? How quickly can the ocean absorb heat or carbon? At what point does it stop taking on our excess and, stop being helpful to us? You can call that carrying capacity. And then on the bottom here, of course, we got the duration of civilization. So a couple ways this could look. So originally, we've got this green line here. Now this could have been if we had expanded with fossil fuels and energy sources and in our wisdom realized we were coming up to the carrying capacity and made changes to stay under our carrying capacity, within Earth's natural limits of supporting us. We could have, some sort of world that responsibly stays within its limits. But of course, we love to grow. We love to max out everything as humans. And so we haven't done that. What we're probably doing is something more like this. So it looks a lot like the carbon pulse, doesn't it? But in this case, we've expanded way beyond the carrying capacity of Earth, with our billions and billions of humans, and our supercharged growth through fossil fuels and exploiting technology to get even better at that. At some point, the carrying capacity is going to have a negative effect on us. Fish stocks won't replenish. Forests won't help our air anymore. The pollution we put out through plastics and other things is going to have a negative effect on us. We won't be able to support our populations, and over time, that population won't be supported. And so, if things continue as they are, we'll probably have some sort of up and then some sort of down, probably in conjunction with the carbon pulse in some way. Now, of course, we can adapt, and we could try to lower ourselves on this curve over, decades, centuries, that sort of thing. But because of this steep curve we've gone up, we're actually going to degrade the carrying capacity of Earth. So that line moves downward. And so the new carrying capacity of Earth is severely degraded. Now, of course, these lines, how I had of them here are, based on other charts I've looked at, and they're very conceptual. I'm not trying to go exactly data. This is meant to be conceptual for you to get kind of the contours of what's here. I'll link, of course, to Nate Hagen's work and William Rees's presentations on both of these concepts, so you can dig in more and get like some more concrete facts on them. So with these two concepts, it seems pretty obvious what's happening or what will be happening. You'd wonder why we aren't like making drastic shifts. Like, why aren't we working towards true sustainability that isn't just lip service? Why aren't we, as a culture, simplifying and getting less, energy dependent and those sorts of things? Why aren't we doing it? I'd say at least in this snapshot here of where we are at in 2024, 2025, it actually comes down to a cultural lens as well. And that's where I want to share this next concept, which is the idea of turnings. In Neil Howe's book, The Fourth Turning, he's an author who's also a demographer. He worked on this book with William Strauss called The Fourth Turning, where they outline these seasons of culture. Before that, they had a book called Generations, where they looked at, the views and attitudes of different generations and how they change over time. And that sort of informed where they went with this next model called turnings. And so I'll probably spend a whole video on this some other time, but just for a really quick breakdown, the turnings are basically 20-ish years blocks in history that separate different generations. And each generation experiences each, season of life in a different way, and they respond throughout their lives in new ways as they move through their own turnings. So the United States, for example, had a high during what they call the first turning. So the most recent first turning is what we would call the post-World War II area, 1946-ish to 1964. Now, this period of time was like rebuilding after war. There was institutional strength, a lot of conformity socially. Everybody was getting back to business, rebuilding the economy. There was really a focus on unified collective progress and emphasis on material growth for everyone, community-oriented values. This was materially a high, and so that's why it's called that. Followed by the high, we have an awakening. Now, this, for me, in my mind, it seems like the rebellious 60s. They characterize this as 64 to 84. There's a lot of spiritual upheaval and cultural rebellion. When things are good materially, you start to wonder what else is wrong, and culture starts to focus on those type of changes. So more a shift towards personal autonomy, self-expression, and then moral and spiritual values over material ones, because materially things are fine. Following that, you have the unraveling. So for most millennials, this is when we were born in. This is 84 to 2008. You just think of the 90s. For me, I just think of the media landscape in the 90s. Individualism, institutional decay is there, erosion of collective trust, focus on personal freedoms, skepticism, I'd say expression too. You look, I'm a musician, and you look at all the 90s music, there was like every flavor to its extreme. Not much conformity, people pushing limits. That was a big characteristic of an unraveling. And so that leads to a crisis. Things unravel and they reach a breaking point. And so Neil Howe, he has a recent book called The Fourth Turning is Here, where he outlines, more of a refined outlook on where the turnings have landed. And they put the fourth turning starting somewhere, close to 2008, the great financial crisis. Fourth turnings are considered a crisis. That's when things really begin to fall apart. And this is why we're not seeing action. Institutions are broken. They have no cohesion. They have no direction, and their hands are basically tied. I mean, you think about governments all over the world, governments in the United States, we're stuck. We can't move forward because we don't have cohesion. We don't have trust. You see that all sorts of crises that we've experienced since 2008. It's a wild one. There's not really a collective response here. Also, materially, things are about as bad as they could get compared to the high. We see massive wealth disparities. We're seeing probably a recession right now. Things are not looking good for that. You also see heightened tensions globally as people, are fighting for resources or fighting for positioning. We see one of the most fraught times right now, which the last fourth turning would have been World War II. That was the Great Depression and World War II. Those were the previous fourth turning. So we're locked in spot because of where we're at in the turnings, and it's yet to be seen when resolving that turning will begin. Howe puts it in a way that partway through the fourth turning, things start to reform around a new direction, a new reaction, and a new way forward. We'll have to see exactly what that looks like. Hopefully it's soon, and hopefully it's a good one. Maybe we can respond to the carbon pulse and overshoot in better ways out of this fourth turning. I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket, but it's possible. The turnings definitely describe where we're at culturally right now. And then I guess the last thing is something I was actually thinking about yesterday that I thought I'd throw in here, and that is I have a few charts that I suppose could be frameworks for how to think about the different issues we're looking at and to understand where they sit and have a clearer view of what responses might look like. So let's see here. This first one that I put together, I called Issues and Crises and Different Types. And so I think one thing that, for example, the prepping space is muddy on is the difference between a chronic crisis and an acute crisis. When you see the trucks that are modified for the zombie apocalypse and they're ready to go for it, those only last as long as the gas lasts. So they're preparing for a very acute, maybe high impact type of event that might be really unlikely. As opposed to, somebody who's learning to farm in their backyard and create some of their own food supply. They're preparing for, supply chain shortages and food system loss. So maybe it's more of a low impact, but it's a chronic thing they're preparing for. So when we look at, widespread pollution that is going to be affecting us over a long period of time, that could be high impact and chronic. If we're talking about, nuclear war, that's definitely high impact and acute. If we're talking about low impact and acute, that could be like a local crisis, like a food shortage in a particular area or a storm hitting a particular area. It doesn't mean they're not important. It's just lower impact on the larger scale. So putting crises in kind of their right spot for understanding how we address them will make a lot of sense. And even for your own, personal adaptation. Another thing, I'm not quite sure how to describe this perfectly yet, but where I got it right now is this idea of, there's issues that are fixed, they're stuck, they're already baked in, like whatever warming we have right now is built in and will carry out its results. And then other things like responsive might be, habitat loss in forests. Can we mitigate those things? Well, yes, we can stop chopping things down. So it's responsive to certain actions that we take. And then there's things that we're completely unaware of. Like up until recently, we didn't realize that the currents in the Atlantic might be changing to cause, you know, weather devastation over in Europe and those sorts of things. So that was unknown and towards a point, and then known would be, we gradually have a sense of how things are warming, of what areas will be farmable and what and not, and we know generally how fixed that might be. So issues can be divided that way. And then as far as responses go, from a civilizational scale, we have things that are really energy intensive and complex. So think like everybody getting an electric car. That is going to take a lot of energy to create those batteries and change over the system. And it's very complex. This is high tech. It has a lot of moving parts, a lot of supply chain. It's going to be very demanding on our resources. Versus, responses that are simple and efficient. Could be electric bikes or just bikes or something different for transportation, or going local with food supplies. Those could simplify and be more efficient. So just that way of thinking. And then for personal adaptation, you have expensive and high tech, these mega bunkers from billionaires trying to build their own self-sufficient, hideouts versus you growing tomatoes in your backyard. There's different ways to adapt to the coming changes that be either expensive or cheap, low tech or high tech, and knowing how to respond and what we have to work with will be really important. So yeah, that's what I got so far. I'm hoping that kicking off this channel, I'll be able to do more videos, maybe more selective on certain topics. And then I'd love to start, interviewing people that are working on these types of issues and responses, to hopefully bring it down to a level that we can all, understand as normal people. I really enjoy learning, but I also have a really hard time with getting my head completely in the clouds and understanding, how do all these big concepts actually affect us in our day to day. So that's my goal. That's my hope, is to get in more of that. And if you're into that, stick around. I'll make some more stuff. Thanks.